welcome to our first panel, The Sky is Not the Limit, where we're going to talk about everything from the global view of where we are today with space exploration, where we're going in the near and maybe not so distant future, and then also, what those goals might be for humanity in space further on down, and how we can actually, as a species, achieve those goals on Earth, on the moon, maybe on Mars or beyond. I'm Tariq, Malik, your host today, editor-in-chief of space.com, where this topic of space exploration is very near and dear to my heart. I think that it's a very exciting day to be talking about the future of space exploration, where we have the world's first all-civilian private mission going to space with Inspiration 4 on SpaceX's Crew Dragon later tonight. So a lot going on in the realm of space flight right now. And this panel really has, I think, the chance to be the most open-ended to talk about where we are today, where we're going, and maybe what the challenges and the advances that we've made over the years will help spur us forward. So, I know that we're going to build off some of the things that you may have heard earlier from Sir Richard Branson in his talk, and Teleset's Dan Goldberg. We've got a packed panel today with three very different and very interesting speakers. And so I wanted to make sure that I introduce them to you all. We've got Tory Bruno, President and CEO of United Launch Alliance, launching rockets galore with new ones to come. Michael Greenley, President and CEO of MDA, building robotic arms in space and much, much more. And also Michelle Mendes, President of the Satellite Canada Innovation Network, really taking an eye of what we're doing now, where we can go in the future, especially for Canada. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Good morning.
I guess to start off, I'd like to kind of give everyone a chance to introduce themselves and where you see your role in today's space exploration environment. So, Michael, maybe you'd be a great person to start. Tell us about yourself, about MDA, and what's going on right now.
Sure. So hi, good morning. I'm Mike Greenley. I'm the CEO of MDA. MDA being a global space company based in Canada. We are fully participating in the upswing that we're seeing these days in the space sector as it continues to grow. I'm sure as we go through our conversations today, we'll talk about the size of the space sector and the pace at which it's growing. We feel that certainly every day in our adventure. We've gone through a lot of changes in the last couple of years, becoming a private company back in 2020 again, Canadian-based global space company, and then going public just this past April on the Toronto Stock Exchange. As we grow into the future, we're using all these new resources that we have to be able to fuel growth. We have three strong business areas in the space sector: Geo Intelligence, which is all about Earth observation, observing the Earth and humanity's activities within it. We own and operate RadarSat-2 and participate with partners to deliver Earth observation information products and services to customers around the world. We have a satellite systems business where we're manufacturing and delivering satellite subsystems, antennas, electronics, and payloads to satellite manufacturers globally, and producing full satellites when and as required into the market. That business continues to really grow as the world looks to especially increase space-based communications globally. We're seeing a tremendous uptick in the conversations about satellite capability for space-based communication in all of its forms. Elements of that space-based communications business is starting to leak into the space exploration side of the house. We're producing communication systems for spacecraft for some customers, and are doing early concept studies for the communication networks on the lunar surface of the moon, in terms of what those could look like, and also what kinds of business models could be on the moon for communications in terms of, could industry collaborate with government agencies and in various business models to be able to deliver that as a service. So we have contracts today where we're looking at that. Our third business area, as you mentioned, is robotics and space operations, where we delivered robotics on Space Shuttle and now on Space Station for the last 20 years, and are continuing to support that, and are very busy delivering Canadarm3, which is the artificial intelligence-based robotics for the Lunar Gateway, which will orbit the moon. So we have a lot of activity in that regard, with a tremendous amount of spin-off activity from that in terms of commercial sensors and robotics that are, we're engaging the market with for a range of activities: satellite servicing, on-orbit assembly, on-orbit manufacturing, and then space exploration operations on the moon and to Mars. Yesterday, we announced that our lunar landing sensors are going on a Japanese Space Agency mission to Phoebus, to one of the moons of Mars, as we continue to explore further. So exciting times for us in this sector.
Thank you so much, Michael. You know, it sounds like there's a lot to look forward to from MDA coming up. Tory, let's go to you next. Tell us what's going on with yourself, with United Launch Alliance, and where things are today.
Sure. Thanks, Tariq. So I am the CEO of United Launch Alliance, and for the next 90 minutes or so, I am all of yours personal rocket scientist. Obviously, we are a space launch company, which means we launch giant 30-story high rockets into space, and we touch your life every single day. If you ever use GPS, we made that happen. If you check the weather today, we made that possible. We have been to every planet in the solar system and beyond. If you've ever had a friend or a loved one in the armed services overseas in harm's way, we've helped to keep them safe. We've flown now 144 times. We have never once failed to take our payload to space. I want to say that this is a really exciting time to be in our industry. You know, the traditional commercial markets in space, telecommunications primarily, a little bit of Earth observation, are flat, but they continue to be stable and strong. And for the first time in really a couple of decades, we have new emerging markets in space, primarily today in the form of what we call proliferated LEO, or sometimes you hear it referred to as mega constellations, taking the internet to space and providing global coverage. Very, very exciting. And at the same time, just over our horizon, also emerging potential markets in cislunar space. The moon and the asteroids just beyond the moon, where there resides a tremendous, just unbelievable abundance of wealth just waiting for us to tap into and to potentially carry humanity to a post-scarcity human future. So this is a tremendously exciting time. We specialize in what we call high energy, or the most difficult or most complex orbits to reach. And we're also pretty excited to be just at the final throes of developing a brand new rocket that we call Vulcan, with its revolutionary upper stage, a Centaur 5, that is going to create reusability in space and entirely new capabilities that will be the backbone transportation system of this new cislunar economy that is going to be here just in the next couple of decades. So this is the best possible time to be involved in space.
Thank you, Tory. I think Tory is giving us a sneak preview of some of our big questions that we're going to want to talk about today, and that Vulcan Centaur rocket in the background there. It looks amazing. Can't wait to see that on the launch pad in the near future. Well, I guess, Michelle, let's move on to you. Tell us kind of what you see as the state of the network, kind of what you're working to achieve, especially now, as Tory mentioned, where we have not just one-off satellites, but giant constellations of satellites, giant opportunities of working space.
Thank you, Tariq, and thank you, Michael and Tory. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Mendes, and I'm the president of Satellite Canada Innovation Network, and we're working to expand that network of spacefaring companies. So we look to expand other sectors into space. Over the last 2 years, we've gotten a lot of inquiries about is it possible for my company to be involved in space? And I'm here to say that that is the truth, that there are many other sectors that are able to work in space. Software companies have contacted us, cloud, hardware companies, advanced manufacturing, various other technologies are required to come into the space sector so that they can feed into the MDAs and the ULAs of the space sector. So SATCAN, it's a lot to say, Satellite Canada Innovation Network, and the space sector is full of acronyms. So SATCAN works to increase Canadian global competitiveness in the space sector. So we look to expand Canadian companies outside of Canada, and we look to bring in other nations as well. So we've worked a lot internationally with the European Space Agency, with so I've worked personally with the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, where other nations collaborate to create cooperation. Most recently, I was on the Government of Canada's Space Advisory Board, where we advised the Canadian government on what should we be doing in space. And in 2018, we issued a report after consulting with the Canadians in Canada and abroad. And we issued a report that the Canadian government subsequently made some announcements, including Canadarm3. So we're very excited to be here to help be a contact point into the space sector, particularly for non-space companies.
Great, thank you. Thank you all three. You know, it's a great place, I think, to start from as we have our discussion today. And before we get a bit too deep into our discussions, I do want to remind the audience out there that we will have some time for questions at the end. You can enter them through the Slido link that you received in your registration. Also, if you go to slido.com and use the hashtag, I believe it's Executive Summit Space, you'll be able to enter them in there. So we look forward to answering your questions. Our friends at the Canadian Chamber are going to make sure that they get through to us. So I think with that, we'll get into our first big discussion. Really, the first topic I'd like to spend time on is kind of talk about where we are now. It's been just over 64 years or so, or coming up on 64 years of an actual space age when the first artificial satellite launched into space, and that was like the size of a beach ball. And today we have a football field-sized space station and plans to go back to the moon coming up. And I think that'd be a good place to say, you know, how did we get to this point? I mean, we're all talking right now over technology from soup to nuts that came from investments in space exploration. You know, maybe Mike, it'd be great to start with you. You know, how did we get here? What has been the big kind of throughput over through line from that first satellite launch to now that you see?
Well, for us, in terms of our history, which is what I could speak to, is, you know, we end up with a situation where, you know, along the way, governments decided that there was activity that was a benefit in space, including, you know, space-based communication, Earth observation, and space exploration. And then there was a commitment to that. So the foundation, really, space is hard. It takes a lot of collaboration across a lot of different people to be able to get into space and then sustain an industrial base there. And there's been a base level of commitment, primarily through government agencies over the 60 plus years that you're talking about, to be able to get that going. Most space companies today, if they trace back their roots, there's going to be anchor customers in governments and government agencies. And even today, we'll see that some of the more flourishing ones have commercial activity, but you still got that anchor customer, even a SpaceX, very strong anchor customer base working with the United States government. So that commitment that has been there all the way along, because of the benefits of space to our society, in Earth observation to help manage the Earth, in communication to help us manage that, and geopositioning, as Tory mentioned, and then the benefits of space exploration and what it does for our communities in terms of advancing technology and back in the day, inspiring people to go into science and engineering and math and everything. Governments believed in that and stayed committed to it. So we, you know, a number of us, like those of us that have been there for 50 years plus, you know, had the opportunity to participate in that early on, and have been able to, you know, maintain a core business from that government commitment that's grown, that started with, you know, a half dozen space agencies, and now we're up over 90 around the world. That enthusiasm creates that foundation, which right now we're just talking about where we are, but, you know, has resulted in a larger, broader commercial play that's been able to evolve. But that's, to me, a key element is that how we got here.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned kind of the national commitment part to it, and I think Tory and Michelle, if you can weigh in on this too, because the origins of everything that we might take for granted now. Of I can go out on my porch and see the space station fly overhead, for example, with my daughter, but and call family across the world with just my phone. That all started with a competition between two big superpowers, two countries that had a very different purpose. And I'm curious how that changed, or how that has changed to what we see with the more civilian applications, the more commercial applications there. And maybe Tory and Michelle, could you kind of weigh in on that about, there was a very national pride origins to what we see today. And maybe that's still a part now, but it seems like it's more of a business as well.
Well, Michael absolutely laid the foundation very accurately. And still today, by the way, there's really only open markets for launch, for example, really in the West, in the US, and perhaps to some extent in Europe. The rest of the world still views the access to space as a sovereign capability, which is one of the reasons why there is and will always be an oversupply of launch when we look at the global picture. But as Michael touched on, it is very, very difficult to operate in space, and it requires very complex technologies, and just the infrastructure involved still remains extremely expensive. And launch sites around the world, for example, are actually government facilities. But what we have seen is first military applications, some exploration in space. Then we've seen government applications that created economic impact here terrestrially. I'll come back to GPS. That is $1 billion a day economic impact globally in the commercial realm. Set aside any government application for it. And then finally, what we're seeing now and have seen over the last decade or so is actual purely commercial activities, initially focused on telecommunications, but now expanding. And it is that single change, starting from the massive investments by governments to create not just infrastructure, but technology, that has allowed commercial industry to move ahead and now have its own place in space.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with that. It's, Michael and Tory make some really good points that, government initiated this investment, and, commercial developments are coming out of this. Space will always be this government commercial partnership because of the security implications and other issues. Regulatory is a big one. And because of this, my work at the United Nations was so critical to make sure that governments were speaking to one another, but also when we were there are a number of key commercial speakers there that are there to say, yes, we need regulations. Yes, we need to understand the requirements for various activities in and around space, but we still need to make this feasible commercially. So through those growing collaborations on the international stage, and I don't want to make that sound like political engagements. Some of them are international cooperations on the political stage, but these are also scientific endeavors that have partnered on these levels to advance scientific and technological growth that couldn't have been done on a single national stage because of requirements, because of where certain geographies sit. So those kinds of collaborations on the international stage have grown both MDA's business and ULA and various others, not just on the hardware side, but on what we call the downstream, the software side and the data side, which has been really important on the international stage.
You brought up I think some great points on that kind of international aspect there, Michelle and Tory, about kind of the bar to entry for some folks. And I was curious what advice maybe all three of you might have for an entrepreneur with, let's say, a bundle of cash and some rocket smarts about where they want to set up shop, if it's for a satellite company or even a support, Michelle, component for something. I mean, a few years ago, I was in a industrial park in Singapore, learning about a new company, Equatorial Space, about how they were testing their rockets in their backyard in Malaysia, and it just seemed like such a different time and a different way to approach access to space than, perhaps 10, 20, or even or 30, 20, or even 10 years ago. So I'm curious, kind of what would the advice be for an entrepreneur to choose a launch site, a launch country, or what regime that they might want to work under?
Sure. Like all, sort of big capital intensive endeavors, an environment where there are incentives for a company to set up shop, where there's a favorable business environment, is always very important and able to, fulfill that classic government role of economic stimulus. And I think, by the way, I think Canada is very interested in this and is looking very hard at how they can stimulate that, and has had success so far. So those are the big things. One of the things you touched on, though, was also launch sites. And I'm going to risk boring you all for a moment with a little bit of orbital mechanics, because where you launch from is really determined by where you want to go to. You can't necessarily practically put a launch site anywhere. And so the big thing that drives that is what we call the inclination that you want to arrive at finally. So if you want to put up a geostationary telecommunications satellite that is near the equator of the Earth and at a very high altitude, so that it appears to hover in the sky because it orbits with 1 day's period, very practical way to do telecom, and the way the traditional market is basically set as a foundation. You need to be at an equatorial inclination. And when you launch, you initially have an inclination of your latitude. You can't just circle the pole. You have to orbit the center of the Earth. And it takes a tremendous amount of energy to change that inclination. That's why when people go to GEO, they like to launch from a location that is far south or as far close to the equator as they can get, because of the energy to change that if you launch from a more northern latitude, greatly reducing the mass of the satellite you could put in orbit. When we go to polar orbits, which are great for Earth observation, it's not as important, but we still need to launch from a landmass directly over water for safety reasons. And so we need a certain profile of coastline. That's why in the US, there's a launch site at Cape Canaveral. That's why the French fly out of Kourou. And it's also why in the US, there's a launch site out in Central California. So where the market you're trying to address has a lot to do with that investment. And launch sites are very expensive. So you don't necessarily always have to just want to have a launch site to be involved in space. There's all sorts of other activities. Ground, the satellite manufacture, the satellite operation is actually the most expensive part and where the most value is derived from space activity. So my advice for Canada would be, don't fixate on a launch site, look at the other things first, and then we'll see where that takes us.
Mhm.
I think that's taken a MDA pretty far, right? Michael, I mean, you may not have a launch site, but you've got arms in space going to the moon, among many other things. Do you have any kind of tidbits that you could share for a budding entrepreneur about where they'd want to set up shop, or even what market to pick?
Yeah, like for me, we've had a great run being Canadian based, and would certainly promote Canada as a place to have a space and industrial base. But we look for expansion around the world as well. I always talk about looking for locations with space ambitions and budgets as legitimate things. We talked a bit about that government industry interaction. Even government space agencies and governments that are investing in space, they're doing it because of the benefits of space, but they're also doing it because of the impact on the economy. Space is a tremendously high quality employer. with a lot of really smart people with above average salaries in terms of and so the high quality positions, to use a government term, that space creates is extremely high and of interest. If you look at government strategies in a country like the UK, their space strategy is unabashedly about economic development. Like they want to have a space sector and they want to have a space economy. And there's a lot of people that are doing that. And so in that kind of an environment, you get two things. You get that anchor customer we talked about, because you've got a space agency or a government that wants to do some of their own missions. In addition, you've got an entrepreneurial environment where they're trying to create an ecosystem of companies, around that spend and create the regulations or the governance environments that Michelle was talking about, in addition to the economic environments, to be able to have a space economy. So the good news is that there's more and more of that. You look at a country, you look at their strategy, you look at what kind of funding they've got available, you look at the facilities and the types of customers that they're clustering together, and that makes for a great environment for setting up shop. In terms of access to space and the conversations about launch, Tory and all their peers are doing an awesome job at driving down the cost of launch. So the really neat thing is that the people with a legitimate idea, like if I could just get into orbit, I could deliver this service, whatever that service is. They can do that now. 20 years ago, they couldn't necessarily do it. To get the funding, the funding and the timings right and the permissions to get into orbit, it was a little bit prohibitive. But the cost of launch and how it's gone down and down and down, and the volume of launch that's available. If you've got a business case, if you've got a bright idea, that's legit, you can often close the business case. You can get the financing, and you've got an affordable entry to the space market to get up there, either with your own launch if it's big enough, or a ride share with a bunch of folks. You see all these, multiple different businesses are on the same launch now. So it's an increasingly accessible thing, which is why we're seeing venture capital now really cranking. Like every year for the last 4 years, venture capital into space has doubled in size every year the last 4 years. And so because it's an increasingly accessible thing. So finding that country that's got the space ambitions and budgets and is really interested in building an ecosystem, that's to me like the thing to pick. And as I said, we enjoy Canada as one of those countries.
Yeah, Mike, you
bring pile on a little bit. What Michael said is worth dwelling on. Space jobs, when you're talking about economic development for a government, is one of the best investments that can be made. A space job is a high quality job, and it typically, the number we use in economic analysis is 10 to 1. Every space job you stimulate in your economy creates another 9 or 10 other jobs, generally of also very good quality. So it is a great investment for a government. I want to add a little bit of clarity to what is enabling the new emerging markets. Yes, we've done a great job, myself and our competitor, in bringing the cost of launch down. It's been cut by more than half just in the last few years since I came here to ULA. But really what has created this explosive growth in spacecraft on orbit, and by the way, if you haven't noticed, the number of active spacecraft on orbit has doubled in the last 18 months, has not been the price of launch. While launch is down, and it is more practical now to get experiments and small ride along and ride shares, something we didn't yet used to be able to do in the old days. This particular piece of explosive growth has all been in LEO. It is all proliferated LEO or mega constellation, and it's really being driven by the technology advancement in spacecraft that has allowed a very high use and capacity spacecraft to be shrunk down in size so that we can put dozens and dozens of them on a single large launch vehicle and reap the benefit of that, dollar per kilogram that is available in lift. It's really the spacecraft that's driving this even more than launch. It's still.
You see how collaborative space is? Like I give him credit for lower launch costs, and he's giving us credit for building efficient spacecraft. Like that's what this industry is like. It's very collaborative.
And I wanted to ask for sorry to interrupt. I think this is like a really great way to kind of talk about where we are in the technology today. And because you've mentioned, I think all three of you, how there are different ways to get into it. And when I was a kid growing up, we had rockets, we had space shuttles. And then there was these really hard to understand experiments that were going on. And today we've got CubeSats. I saw one with just Hello Kitty beaming pictures of Earth, views of Earth back to people on the ground. And so I think maybe, Michelle, this might be a great to start with you, but I mean, what are some of the biggest technological feats? Tory and Michael have mentioned a few of them, but for the companies that are approaching you, what are the most impactful advances that have really opened access to space right now for the people that you're talking with?
Yeah, it's been very eye-opening. We've always known there are what we call adjacent sectors. So there are sectors that will feed into the technologies that MDA are building and that ULA are building, and even on the downstream side. So the software development, and so again, I just want to say that I am not the scientist or the engineer in the room. I have a business and finance background. So, Tory's the rocket scientist. Michael is the CEO engineer. I am not that person, but there is something that is very critical for satellites that are downloading data to ground stations, which is how we get our information. The amount of data that has to come and how quickly and how dense that data is, that all has to be interpreted. That is a bottleneck for the kind of business that we can do in orbit. And I know that sometimes other areas like software, like advanced manufacturing, are very confused by how do I get into that? There are a lot of multidisciplinary courses. Some are short courses, some are university courses, master's degrees and things. So Western University is launching one for interdisciplinary space, and the International Space University has a really good one-week program for these other areas that are interested in getting involved in space. It helps you understand the space lingo, so you can understand what people like Tory and Michael are saying, not that they're not speaking English, but.
And I think that sets the stage, right, for what technologies we really need, or that are being developed now. I guess, in the last kind of a few minutes we've got for the section here, maybe Tory and Mike, I'm wondering, everyone wants to know when we're going to go to Mars. And for as long as I can remember, it's always been the next 20 years. And it still is the next 20 years. But I'm wondering what are the key technologies that are being developed now? We've seen reusable rockets, we've seen reusable spacecraft. I think Tory ULA is going to be launching one for Boeing soon, including parts of Vulcan there. But I'm wondering what are those newer technologies that are coming in the next couple of years that are going to have that impact to push us either over the top in terms of getting more access to space, more people in space, and tapping those technologies of the asteroid belt.
Well, Mars is a great topic to start with, because there it's really about the technologies that will allow humans to do this safely. There's a couple of big problems with going to Mars for people. The first being the tremendously intense and hostile radiation environment of deep space. It's 10 times more radiation when we talk about being on a trip to Mars or even just to the moon than when we talk about the International Space Station, which exists within our magnetosphere and is greatly protected. So that's the first problem that we're going to solve in our initial exploration of the moon. In addition to that, it's a long trip. Today, it's a minimum 2-year mission when we send people to Mars. That's a long time to be in microgravity, to be exposed to the radiation, of course, to also be exposed to the potential for what we call CMEs, or proton storms. And in plain English, every once in a while, our sun just decides to blast a giant death ray out into space. And if you are in front of it, you're in big trouble. And we've actually had close calls during the Apollo program where that, before it was well understood, we were within a month or so of having a really bad day for the people who were going to and from the moon. So that's that's really the first big thing. But that's really for the exploration missions. What we want is routine travel to and from Mars. When we have routine, interplanetary human transport, we don't want it to take so long. And so we need new propulsion technologies. And the first one that will come on the horizon will be nuclear thermal propulsion that will allow us to cut that trip significantly and make all those other problems easier. And that's being invested in right now. And, we're pretty excited about where that's going to go.
So we've heard about, so there's the human element, right? How am I going to keep my astronauts safe on the flight, my passengers, right? I mean, we don't think twice when we get on an airplane. Maybe now we have to wear a mask, right? But we don't think about all of the other stuff that goes on. But so that's one of them. You talk about propulsion there. We always want to go faster. I think even on Earth, right? I'd still like to get to California a bit faster than the 5 or 6 hours that flight takes. But is there anything else that is coming? I'm wondering. I mean, it seems like there's a lot more public interest too, and I'm wondering if that kind of investment is spurring the industry forward, maybe a bit faster than in the past.
Yeah, the presence of private capital investment in space is a new thing, and it's pretty exciting. The one thing that I'm hoping for is that the investors who are coming in have the stamina to understand that space takes a long time, that technology development in space isn't as rapid as, say, in the .com industry, for example, and that while you can come in now, and some people are doing this, they're coming in now, they're investing, they're inflating the value of a startup company, then they're cashing out and kind of leaving it on its own. So there's a little bit of get rich quick happening. That's not sustainable. And it's not that kind of industry. We want investors who come to space and are prepared to stay for the long haul to see these missions and these new advancements through to the end.
And I just like to say as well to what Tory's saying is that, again, not being the engineer, the scientist in the room, a lot of these grand developments are just people standing on each other's shoulders. And, like MDA is standing on the shoulders of ULA, and ULA is standing on the shoulders of its predecessors. So a lot of this stage development and collaboration happens because of, MDA is very cooperative with its Canadian counterparts. Again, ULA the same with its international, and MDA is also internationally known for being a collaborator to help cooperate and to build new technologies that we couldn't develop just in Canada, or that the US can't build just in the United States. And so these small victories are the victories that are going to get us to Mars. And I just also like to say, from an investment point of view, we have to start making these small victories, these small developments, investable, commercialize them, because as we grow our ability within the commercial realm, they're going to become safer for investment, and then we'll be able to invest in the more riskier, the grander things, if you will, that will get us to Mars. So that's been my view. Yeah. And Michael, you'll want to chime in on this, particularly with RadarSat.
Yeah, and sorry, I was just thinking out loud as you were talking there. Because the other aspect of that, the hot technology thing, is just and back to the point about the population support, is also the dual use aspect of it. Yeah. Especially for a country like Canada, where we come from, like it's very, very powerful dual use aspect. As we solve how to have communication networks on the moon, which will allow us to solve how to have communication networks with Mars, we solve all kinds of things for space-based communication that makes those low Earth orbit constellations even more efficient to bring communications to rural and northern communities. As we saw what Tory was talking about in terms of nuclear propulsion, a lot of the companies working on nuclear propulsion for space are also looking at small unit reactors, whereby you can put a small nuclear device in a northern or a rural community and just to completely change the nature of a northern and rural community in terms of its power base. As we study humans going to the moon and then into Mars, we're looking at sensors that, like MDA is involved in some of this, like sensors that are being put on your body to do an entirely new level of diagnosis, reaching into AI databases to say not what's wrong with you right now, but what could be wrong with you over the next 3 to 9 months as you go on a long journey, and how do we get ahead of that medical diagnostic curve in an environment where the doctor can't come. which also leads into robotic surgery and like, what kind of procedures could we do on Mars in terms of the top 10 things you'd likely have to do to a human to fix them if they broke, then changes the nature of remote medicine. In terms of, again, back to those northern and rural communities as we go into the future. And then to survive on the moon, we're going to learn how to grow food. And then we're going to learn how to grow food on Mars, which means we're going to learn all kinds of things about how to grow food in remote communities. And so for large nations like a Canada, like the dual use aspect of all of this stuff is going to be extraordinary back in terms of life on Earth.
There's a connection between people and their technology that I don't think we've talked about, despite all of the different technologies we have now for our vehicles. There's a connection there. I mean, I think about right now, there's astronauts that are tweeting out photos of how gorgeous the planet is, and I'm wondering how you've seen that change the perception of where space is and how accessible it is. And I think that just to kind of wrap up this section, if you've got some thoughts on it for all three of you.
For me, people definitely see it and believe it. For me, I feel it the most in recruitment. With our growth right now, we're doing tremendous, like hundreds of people we're recruiting. There's always been a pocket of engineers in the world that have dreamed of space, or just humans that have dreamed of space. The fact that people can now use their science, technology, engineering, and math skills and engage in space, or just their business skills and engage in the space industry is a huge draw. But people's ability that they see that what I'm going to work on, maybe, back 40 years ago, it might've been once in my lifetime, something's going to space. These people are seeing that they're going to work on stuff that's going to be in space, working in space, part of space all the time. They're going to have chances to go to space. If they're successful enough, they're going to take vacations in space. It is a fully engageable thing to people. And there's these two classes of people you see in an interview. Some people that think this is a good job, and then the people that have dreamed about space since they were 5 years old and oh my God, I just want this job. And they can feel it, that it's real now, and it's very accessible. It's real.
Can I just say as well that this is what was the impetus for me to leave the business world and translate my career into space. That was critical, because what I saw was that, we had, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. There always has been, but always, even the nations that weren't speaking to each other politically or otherwise, their scientists and their engineers continued to work together in this area. Space has been a unifier among humanity. And I know that I sound like a billboard when I say that, but it's true. There are countries that work together, and they develop that collaboration, that cooperation to better humanity. And I've seen that at the United Nations, and it was really awe-inspiring to see that we can make that benefit. And these were lawyers talking to each other, because, space law is a thing. Space mining is a thing. It is, this isn't science fiction. And I think, Tariq, what you're getting at is the science fiction as we used to see it, Star Wars, Star Trek, it's becoming science fact. And I know that it seems out of this world, pardon the pun, but it is true, and these things are happening. So it's the awe-inspiring things that happen behind the scenes that can really be the differentiator, I think.
Well, I would really like to kind of move from there to looking towards that future that Michelle was just talking about there. One thing that Michael, that you had mentioned was about how you maybe in the past people might see you one mission launch that they've worked on in their career, but now it seems like there's something going on every other week from some country or some company somewhere. And I'm wondering, has the move in Canada and the US and elsewhere towards a more receptive environment for commercial access to space or private companies getting into space, has that made longer term projects like some of those to every planet that ULA has has flown. Does it make them a lot easier? Are they tougher because of new requirements or rules and regulations? I think Tory, with ULA being at the forefront for all of these missions, maybe we could start with you. Is it easier to get a mission off the ground now, or is it harder for companies?
Well, it actually is much easier now. The process for licensing has been greatly simplified, but really what is now on our plate is how to cope with the mega constellations. And what we need in this environment is a set of regulations that are international, by the way, because this is not only a Western thing, where we will have rules of the road and an understanding of how we both behave there so that we can really expand and capitalize on this tremendous economic opportunity without creating an orbital debris problem that we are not able to cope with. So the trick for regulation is to set an environment where everybody can come and compete and have access while not being overly prescriptive or specific in the how-to or the technologies that are involved, because invariably you can't predict the future. You will get it wrong, and that will have a stifling effect on the economic growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Michael, if you could kind of weigh in there too, kind of on the same theme. I mean, we've got different projects that I know MDA is working on there. Is it easier now for the company to come up with its own plans, with its own vehicles, its own systems, and get them on board, or do you see a lot of that same red tape that you saw in the past?
I do think it's easier to get projects initiated. It's easier to get projects funded and financed, like a little bit in general, because there is this growing commercial marketplace. There's this increase in investment that is occurring because people are seeing and believing the accessibility of space. And the affordability of it continues to increase, and therefore the business case makes more and more sense. And so it's a self-feeding machine. It just all keeps growing as a result of that enthusiasm. That combined with the fact that from a space exploration perspective, where we started, the return to the moon, the expansion to Mars, so many different countries are getting involved in that. There's a tremendous surge of government growth activity as well, which is then driving a growth in defense, because the more activity there is, the more you end up with a military conversation in and around all of this. So the magnitude of the growth and the accessibility of space makes all the business cases work, which makes the investment work, which makes projects easier. So all of that is in play. There is red tape, and there always, like any other environment, any other industrial environment, we will constantly be in a dialogue to improve the regulatory environment to both enable business and ensure safe and effective activity. That happens in manufacturing of cars, and it will happen in going into space. You're constantly going to be working on those things to improve it, but projects are easier to make them happen now.
Yeah,
there's an adjustment going on at the government level as well, because what's happening is, so I sat on the committee for the Remote Sensing Space Systems Act in Canada. It was the same legislation since, I think it was like the 1970s that was going on. It was absolutely painful to get licensed in Canada. And Canada has taken steps to make that easier now, so that they can open up their market. So governments like the UK have done an amazing job to adjust their regulations, and like Tory said, not making it too prescriptive. How can we know right now what we're going to develop and how we have to regulate it? So and by the way, and I left the US out because they have been the forerunners in this. So the US has done a great job at making regulatory issues much more streamlined.
I wanted to kind of take that and look ahead to 2036. That's like 15 years from now. And I think Tory might have given us a taste of what we have to think about there. But I've got like this wish list of what I would like to see us do, humanity. I mean, not like myself. Well, I'd like to go to Mars too. But to stay on track, I wanted to ask what you feel might be truly feasible, right? In the last 15 years, we've seen maybe a huge change in what is possible in space because the technology is smaller, more affordable. We have reusable vehicles a bit more often than we did before. But we are going to have mega constellations cluttering up orbit from many different companies and a much more competitive environment to reach space. So I think maybe just at a snapshot, if you can weigh in, the next 15 years, is it realistic? Are we going to have people in a hotel in space? Tory, cislunar space?
We will have people, space tourism. There'll still be billionaires in the next decade. So it won't be something that necessarily you and I will do, but it'll be heading in the right direction. The most important thing that will happen in that time frame is the beginning of an in-space propellant industry.
So space gas stations is
Got it.
so you always need a place to stop, like a pit stop, right? If you're going to go on a road trip. How about mining? Tory, you mentioned this about how there's untapped wealth. Is there going to be a new gold rush in the asteroid belt that MDA robotic arms are going to be able to pick up, Mike?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's hard to comprehend how much wealth is there. Just the near Earth objects that are within easy reach of the moon contain 1,000 years worth of Earth's annual production of industrial metals and more precious metals than we have ever extracted in all of human history. The only thing that is stopping us is practical access. And the reason I started with propellant a minute ago is because that's the key that unlocks all of that.
Mike, it sounds like you have something to say too.
Yeah. It's the only time in my life I ever used the word quintillion in terms of like dollars, because when they do the math on these things, it's like a quintillions of dollars of so you end up with like a bit of a new language in terms of the density of this. In terms of the technologies, in terms of transportation, which we discussed, which are solvable problems, in terms of sensors, in terms of remote robotic operations, we're doing all those things today. We're going to continue to advance those, right? Lunar Gateway adds in artificial intelligence based autonomous robotic operations, monitored and controlled from Earth. So as we do these things, we're knocking off the technologies that make that a tremendous economy accessible, which is not just an economic opportunity, as Tory mentioned earlier, but sustainment opportunity where some of these things we will run out of in time on Earth. And there are tremendous, volumes of this activity available, or resources available for us outside the Earth. So we don't have to keep digging holes. We can go out there and find stuff. So and we see it. Like countries are investing. There are countries that are making it a theme to invest their support to industry to look at their R&D in these areas and how to transition a terrestrial resource mining industrial base to partner up with the space economy and figure out, how we're going to get ready for that 10, 15 years from now.
And also, Canada is a leader in resource extraction and has been for a long, long time. So
yeah, absolutely.
So absolutely having this transfer of technology, and that's where I'm going to go with my comment on this, is the adjacent technologies to space are going to facilitate all of this for the MDAs and the ULAs of the world. Things like the lighting that we require in space is something that so for example, the hydroponics lighting industry has contacted us about this. So there are many ways to feed into the quintillionth of billions of dollars that Mike is talking about.
This sounds like a really great time to shift to some questions that we've gotten from our viewers, because a lot of them are actually about what we're talking about right now. And as a reminder, if you are watching and you do have a question for for Michelle or Tory or Michael, we are on the Slido platform that you received in your registration link. Or also a hashtag Executive Summit Space. So please let us know. And the reason I wanted to interrupt here is because one of the first questions we have is from Daniel Sachs of the Canadian Space Mining Corporation, and he wanted to know about where in situ resource utilization, this mining of anything from minerals or metals to the water that NASA and Canada and others want to find on the moon for future moon bases. how will that factor into a new supply chain in space? Like, is it something that we truly need to build in? Can we count on it? And I should point out, if you do have a question, the hashtag is exec summit space, pardon me, not executive, so exec summit space. So in situ resource in the supply chain, can we bank on it? Do we still not know if we've got the technology? Tory, Mike, thoughts?
We can absolutely bank on it, but yes, there's technology development required to not just, mine or extract natural resources, but to do that in space in a very, very hostile environment.
We can't call Bruce Willis to
No.
get an oil crew.
Well, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it. And so we want to think of this as a journey where the first things we're doing is enabling the transportation system so the economics work. Today, when a rocket's sitting on the pad, it is 90% propellant, and most of what the propellant lifts to go to space is itself. Michael's spacecraft is typically only 30% of the mass of my rocket when it's all stacked and together. It's just not economically practical to do anything like that in the realm of ISRU if we bring our propellant from Earth. We've got to get it in situ off the moon or the other objects where it resides. Then we will first be bringing these natural resources back to Earth to fuel the industrial activity here on Earth. But over time, this will migrate off planet so that we start seeing economic activity that initiates and finishes in space manufacturing, the utilization of those resources there in space as we eventually and slowly migrate heavy industry off the planet.
Great. Michael, thoughts?
Nope, I'm just agreeing with that. I'm just agreeing with that. And I think that there'll be, it's not like a wait a long time and then see thing, like you mentioned like activities on the moon, over the next decade as the Artemis program continues or advances, and we start to build habitats on the moon and do work with resource management on the lunar surface. Like that's one of the reasons why we're going there, is to go and figure all this stuff out. And then be able to expand on that as we go further into other planets and or the asteroid activity. So absolutely, it'll be an incremental growth curve as we start to move out here in the next few years.
I've got another question for you, Mike, and it's about the workforce in for Canadian companies hoping to get into space, and it's primarily how do you keep up with that demand, that ever increasing demand for new aerospace design and testing simulation engineers, especially given that there might be perhaps a limited talent pool, for different local locations in Canada. So what are your tips for helping people find the talent that they need to fit their aerospace work?
Yeah, so all I can really talk about is kind of what works for us. We are recruiting a lot of people these days, as you mentioned, a lot of those engineers. The competition is high. Pretty much every industry these days needs systems engineers, software engineers, and artificial intelligence engineers, whether that's space or aerospace or defense or financial management, insurance companies. Everybody wants systems, software, and AI, like just everybody. And so that's a huge competitive environment. We compete on that by trying to be a good employer, by trying to pay reasonable market-based salaries. We compete on that based on the topic. I mentioned that there's all this competition, and so sometimes I joke you can be a systems or software engineer with AI, and you can make a really exciting form for the insurance sector, or you could come and build like a spacecraft that's going to go to Mars, and some people think that's cooler. And so we do compete on our topic area, which is there are this member of the society, especially the technical society, where like people are very interested and excited by space, and so that's a legitimate draw. And everything we talked about, whereby the thing you're likely going to work on is probably going to space, and so it's not it's a very real opportunity. So all of those things for us combine in the conversation to be able to attract people into the industry. So you got to have a good work environment, treat people well, pay them well. But then the exciting work opportunity of space is a legitimate additional draw, and the fact that it's real, like it's probably going to go to space, whatever it is you're working on.
That's great.
And
That's great.
everything Michael said is right on. And the only thing I would add to that is, first off, space is for everybody.
Yeah.
So, we talk a lot about STEM because that's our most acute demand, but all the disciplines are necessary to make this endeavor work. We need business people. Believe it or not, we need lawyers. We need people in the media, arts. We need all kinds of people to do this.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would probably want to say related to that is, because we are, short of lots and lots of talent, and it takes everyone to do this, and it's for everyone. Diversity also has to be a big focus area for all of us who are employers in our industry. We just can't afford to waste that talent. These people should be a part of our industry. They should aspire to be in space. They should be able to picture themselves in this endeavor, taking things off our planet and bringing things back. We really want to reach out to those various communities and pull those people in and let them know this is for them too. This is for everyone.
Yeah. And I just would like to say one thing on the back of Michael and Tory, is that the STEM development and the non-STEM development is really critical. In 2030, so there was a socioeconomic report done by CSA, what seems like forever ago, in 2015. I think there's another one coming out soon. But if you take a look at that, 2030 is going to be a critical year where there's going to be a very large gap in the pipeline for what they call HQP, the highly qualified personnel. And there's just more people retiring than there are to fill those jobs. And so that's why, so MDA, ULA, and many others have done an incredible job at investing in that, in filling that job pipeline. Things like, providing internships. Those are critical. If you're a great engineer in something else, there's still that need to understand space and how it impacts space. So I just want to say that the investment in that employment pipeline is really, really critical.
I actually have two related questions just for you, Michelle, on that. And the first one is from Nima, and I hope I pronounce this properly, Durali Beni. And they say, like, as an undergraduate engineering student, where should they look to get their foot in the door for an internship, for kind of a toehold in the industry itself?
Well, there's a number of internship possibilities, and the Canadian Space Agency does offer some opportunities through their website. I know that MDA actively goes out, and I know that there are some other internship specific organizations in the United States, Europe, and various others. So I can certainly speak to those directly if people want to reach out.
Yeah,
the other piece of that employment piece is like, and the internship opportunity is that it's not just about, ULA or MDA and our hiring. Like, we have huge supply chains, right? So like, I'll have hundreds of companies working on a Canadarm3 by the time it's in full flight, or dozens supporting a next generation radar satellite. And so it's not just about us hiring. Some people like more small businesses, and but paying attention to our supply chains, which will all be growing as we go through this next phase, is we do spread the work around. We're not trying to sit here and just stack all these people in our companies. We're leveraging the full economy to be able to do this stuff. So paying attention to the companies that are coming up and growing and seeking out internship opportunities with them is also an important thing to do.
And I know the universities are really working hard at this as well. The universities are really reaching out to the commercial market to develop internship opportunities. Western, the Institute for Space and Planetary Science has a recognized program for that as well.
Yeah, well, I think those are all great tips for folks to follow up on. I could talk about space all day with the three of you, and sometimes by myself when no one's looking. But we are sadly kind of coming to the end of our time, and I just wanted to kind of give a sum up. Clearly, it seems like there's so much more opportunity now than ever before in the space industry. Not just for Canada, but for countries and companies around the world. I'm excited. I grew up where there was only one American spaceship in the U.S. Now there's like a whole flotilla, and it's not just in one country or U.S. and Russia, but it's all around the world with different international elements and an amazing investment from Canada as well. But I think it'd be great to kind of have each of you kind of offer some closing remarks. Michael, can we start with you? I'm just curious what you'd like to say to someone.
No, I think just first of all, appreciate the opportunity for being here today. This has been a great conversation. I'm hoping that that people listening are for those who might not know, are learning more about the space economy, that it really is a real economy. I often liken it to discovering a new continent. I don't know what it was like back in the 1480s when people discovered North and South America, but this is like finding a new country, a new continent with all kinds of resources. In terms of as we're making this thing more and more accessible, and all nations are starting to participate, and it is a real and legitimate opportunity. As a Canadian-based space company, and we're talking to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, like most people don't realize, Canada was the third country into space after the United States and the USSR. As a result of being the third country into space, and some strategic choices that our governments have made to get into space-based communication, which created companies like Telesat, which made strategic decisions in robotics to make sure that we put robotics on space shuttle, which has led to a whole industrial base for MDA to put up radar-based Earth observation satellites and allow us to be world leaders. It is a great country to create a space-based activity in and grow space-based businesses from. So we're very proud to be a part of that. Hopefully people can tell when we talk, there's a tremendous growth and future coming. I like it that we can focus on the space sector, and we don't have to worry about finding additional avenues for growth. We can focus on space, we can grow in space, and have a huge next 20 years of economic activity around what's going to be a tremendous opportunity. So thanks a lot for having me.
Well, thank you, Michael. And Tory, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. First, thank you to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for letting me be a part of this really, really cool conversation. This is just such an exciting time to be involved in this industry. Canada has a wonderfully vibrant space industry. It's growing. It's going to do new things. This will be true around the world. And we are standing really just on the threshold of a whole new epoch in human history. And I just want to finish with what I said a moment ago. Space is for everyone.
Thank you. And Michelle, your closing thoughts?
Well, I also want to thank the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to be here. I think that this conversation is a long overdue. I'm really excited to speak to other industries about coming into space. It's something that is so exciting and is so rewarding, and the ability to potentially make the impact to have the future generations be a part of this is so exciting. And I'm so grateful for Michael and Tory to be here to show the cooler technology and scientific explorations that we've been able to do. And my closing thoughts are that adjacent technologies and businesses can be a part of this. And like Tory said, it is for everybody. And like Mike said, there is a need for expansion into other sectors. So thank you very much for having me here as well.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And I think I can speak for both the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and everybody listening, least of all myself, to thank our excellent panelists for all of your thoughts today. We had Michael Greenley, President and CEO of MDA. Thank you. Tory Bruno, President and CEO of the United Launch Alliance. I love those rockets. And Michelle Mendes, President of the Satellite Canada Innovation Network. Thank you all so much. And thank you to all of you watching at home or at work.